Hey guys, today's video we're going over the circular saw. There are a few different types of saws: the worm drive, the hypoid, the helical, and the spur gear. They also come in different styles: rear handle and side winders, blade left and blade right, plus corded and cordless. I know that sounds like a lot, but by the time we're done, you'll have a much better understanding of the circular saw and know what saw fits you best. Let's start by looking at the different parts of the saw. You have the motor and housing, upper guard, retracting lower blade guard, shoe, handle, auxiliary handle, trigger and safety switch, bevel adjustment, depth adjustment, blade, blade alignment scale, auxiliary rip fence, and some saws have a rafter hook to hang your saw. Then you have rear handle, where the motor is parallel to the blade and the handle is behind the motor at the rear of the saw. Then sidewinder, where the motor is perpendicular to the blade and the handle is closer to the body of the saw. There are some sidewinders that use rear style handles. Then blade left saws, where the blade is on the left side of the saw, and blade right saws, where the blade is on the right side of the saw. While both saws can be used right-handed or left-handed, blade left saws were designed for the right-handed so you can see your line while cutting, and blade right saws for the left-handed so they can see the line while cutting. Now let's look at the different types of saws, starting with the worm drive. This was first invented by Skill Saw back in 1924. The worm drive gear, which the saw is named after, is a very robust and durable design. The main benefit of a worm drive saw is the worm gear allows for a much greater speed reduction, giving the saw a lot of torque in a small footprint. With all that power comes great responsibility. Worm drive saws need oil to lubricate the gears because of the sliding friction produced by the worm gear. This means the oil will need to be checked and changed from time to time. Worm drive saws come in both corded and cordless. Next is the hypoid saw. A hypoid gear is a type of spiral bevel gear. The hypoid gear is offset from the gear center, and the teeth are helical or spiral. Hypoid gears are a cross between a bevel gear and a worm drive. Compared to a helical gear, which is the next saw, hypoids are quieter, smoother, and produce more torque. Like the worm drive, the motor is parallel to the blade, making it a rear handle saw. The hypoid gear also experiences some sliding friction, so it needs oil. Because this is less of an issue than worm drive saws, the gears are sealed in an oiled housing, so there is no maintenance. Next is the helical gear saw. Helical gears are a type of cylindrical gear with slanted teeth in opposite directions. Compared to a typical sidewinder saw that uses simple spur gears, which are straight tooth gears, helical gears have a larger contact ratio, excel in quietness, less vibration, and able to transmit a larger force. While this saw has power, it has less torque than the hypoid and worm drive saws. This style saw comes in both corded and cordless, along with rear handle and sidewinder, and blade left or blade right. Last is the spur gear, which is common on sidewinder saws and little cordless saws like this 20 volt. This is a simple straight gear with less torque than the other styles. It's also much simpler gear design, which generally brings the cost of the saw down. Spur gears are also noisier saws, especially at higher RPMs. Here you can see an example of a spur gear used in a sidewinder saw. The spur gear pinion is ground into the shaft of the rotor, and the gear and blade shaft are pressed together. When the rotor turns, the pinion engages the gear, turning the shaft and blade. Now that we know a little bit more about the saws, let's look at what each saw has to offer. Worm drive saws are the workhorses of circular saws. Very robust and powerful with a long track record. A quality worm drive saw can last you your whole life. I personally prefer worm drive rear handle saws for cutting lumber on the ground, overhead, giving you better reach when cutting sheet goods, notching, and bevel cutting. The biggest downside to the worm drive saw is the weight. If you're a beginner or don't use saws that often, this might take some time to get used to. Next is the hypoid saw. Very similar to the worm drive, has a little less torque, but does have a sealed gearbox, so you don't need to change the oil. It is a rear handle saw, which I like, but just like the worm drive saw, it's heavy. And I find it not as smooth. Listen to the sound of both saws and you'll see what I mean. Next is the helical saw. This is a step up from your really inexpensive straight spur gear saws, having more torque, quieter, and smoother operation. If you like sidewinders, this saw will get the job done. Now let's talk about cordless saws. You might be thinking, no way. Cordless saws are too weak. If you're talking about this 20-volt cordless saw, you're right. This saw is not meant for production. It's designed to make a couple cuts when you need it. But cordless saws have come a long way since this design. They're now making cordless saws that have more power than their corded saw. Using brushless DC motors with higher voltages and minimizing losses, they can generate a lot of power. So don't be afraid to try out a cordless saw. I hope this video gives you a better understanding of the different types of circular saws and which one suits you best. Next video will be all the tips and tricks to using your saw and cutting like a professional. Thanks for watching. Check out the other videos on my channel for more building tips and tricks. Hit those like and subscribe buttons. You can also catch me on Facebook and Instagram. Just hit the links in the description, and I'll see you next time.